What's going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the FF Ballbusters podcast. My name is Will, joining me is my co-host Eric, and today we're here to talk some buys and sells following what has been a crazy start to NFL free agency. But before we get into that, Eric, you got anything for the people?
Yeah, man. Just real quickly, we really appreciate all of the support that we've been getting from you guys as of late, and we want to keep that momentum going. So if you guys are new to the channel, if you are a returning watcher, and you are enjoying the content that we put out, please let us know by hitting that subscribe button, by hitting that like button, and also by hitting that notification bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest releases. And lastly, if you want to join the conversation, talk to us more about some of these buys and sells, hit us up in the comments down below. We'd be more than happy to talk to you. But with that, I think I'm ready to get into it.
Absolutely. So we're gonna have keep trade cut up in the background. That way we can take a look at some player values as we go along. But we're gonna start off with our buys. Gonna start on the more positive side of things, I suppose. And Eric, who do you feel is a buy going into this free agency period right now?
Yeah, maybe my favorite buy of anybody that's changed teams throughout this kind of crazy week that you alluded to. It's going to be Diontae Johnson. He is listed as keep trade cuts wide receiver 44, which I believe is just way too low for him at this point. I love the landing spot. People might be a little bit scared of the Carolina Panthers in general, which makes sense. There should be some trepidation based on the way that they performed last year, based on the way that Bryce Young looked last year. Um, but I think that the opportunity here for Diontae is fantastic. There's a tweet that I wanted to reference here from Guru Fantasy World. I'll put that up on the screen so you guys can see it as well. But Diontae Johnson, in his career so far, he has 169 target season on his resume. He's posted career highs in yards per route run and PFF receiving grade both last year. So he's not washed. He's not fallen off. If anything, he's improving. And he goes from competing with George Pickens to now like a 34-year-old Adam Thielen, who, fills kind of the same role, but is much better at it at this point in his career. And I think he gets a quarterback upgrade. Obviously, Bryce had some struggles last year, but with the coaching staff upgrade, with the offensive line upgrades that this team has made in free agency, I think Bryce can absolutely bounce back and definitely be better than Pickett or Mason Rudolph in that regard. So I think there's going to be a ton of targets to come for Diontae Johnson here. Obviously, we saw Adam Thielen average through the first 8 weeks of the season just under 20 PPR points per game. So Diontae can do the same, if not better. The one downside, if you can even call it that, is that I do expect this team to add one or even two wide receivers in the draft. But I think that even opens up your trade window even further if you want to wait until after the draft, and maybe his KTC value will be even more depressed than it currently is right now.
I absolutely agree with that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Diontae Johnson. And like you said, I think him being rated this low is kind of criminal at this point, honestly, just from the player that we know Diontae Johnson is. And there should be brighter days ahead for the Carolina Panthers, just in terms of the offense, getting things together, and them really starting to build around Bryce Young. So, like you said, there should be plenty of opportunity for him here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one more thing before we move on, just looking at the KTC rankings of wide receivers here, some guys above him that I would be willing to trade for him. We got Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen, Xavier Worthy is listed on here, but really any mid to early second in 2024, I'd be fine with trading. McLaurin, Watson. I think Christian Kirk is debatable. I think that he's in a good spot. But even all the way up to Marquise Brown, who we're going to talk about a little bit later on in this video, I'd be willing to move for Diontae.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. The next player that I was actually looking at as a buy, he is ranked as the wide receiver 52 in keep trade cut. It's Mr. Marvin Mims for the Denver Broncos. So I feel like he's a guy, he didn't really get utilized a whole lot last year, but I feel like the games he did get involved, they were typically pretty big games or very efficient games for him. But a reason why he didn't get involved, he had two wide receivers ahead of him. Russell Wilson was still there. I think they were still trying to work out exactly what this team was supposed to look like, especially with Sean Payton there as well. But something I like to take into account is the fact that, with Marvin Mims, he was drafted and brought in by Sean Payton. They've since traded Jerry Jeudy over to the Cleveland Browns. So so there is a lot of real estate opened up. I just feel like there's a lot of opportunity for Marvin Mims to go out here and actually provide in a fantasy aspect. He's a guy that we looked at as a prospect. He was one of the better prospects coming out of the draft, one of the better prospects coming out of college. I just feel like this is the opportunity for him to really put everything together and make it happen out there on the NFL field now that things have opened up for him more. It just kind of stands to be seen who is the quarterback over in Denver or what they end up really doing with that offense and what direction they go in. But the ball has to get thrown to somebody out there. And with Cortland Sutton left and Marvin Mims left, I think there's just a lot of opportunity for him.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Like you mentioned, his college profile was fantastic. He was one of our favorite kind of second round picks in 2023's rookie drafts. Rookie year was obviously really concerning. His production or kind of lack thereof does kind of put him into an analytical bucket where a lot of receivers don't come back from. Like very few have had the numbers in that range that he had in his rookie year and still gone on to be fantasy producers. And so I do think that our opinions kind of differ in that regard. But some important factors to consider that I do think point in his favor, which you've mentioned here. There's another tweet that I'll put up on the screen from Warren Sharp. Russell Wilson, in terms of his depth of target, was one of the worst in the NFL in years. 27% of his passes were behind the line of scrimmage. That was first out of any quarterback since 2005. 62% of his passes were within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. That was second out of any quarterback since 2005. So they were really limiting his downfield attempts, which is really where Marvin Mims makes his bread and butter. So there is going to be a lot of question marks as to which quarterback comes in and fills that role and whether they give him the opportunity to stretch the field, because that's what's going to help Marvin Mims succeed. But then also, like you mentioned, with Jerry Jeudy leaving, not only does that open up some target vacancy to be filled by Mims, but also I feel like there was a role redundancy with those two receivers where they did kind of the same thing. And so now that that role opens up, I think that's even more opportunity for Marvin Mims to hopefully flourish now that he's gone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who else do you have as a buy?
I have one more buy on here. We don't need to change the page. We're still talking cheap wide receivers. I got DeAndre Hopkins, currently listed on Keep Trade Cut as the wide receiver 60. He is not washed yet, as a lot of people might lead you to believe. Looking at his PFF grades, I believe this was his highest PFF grade dating back to his first year in Arizona. So that would have been 2020, I believe. So he's still performing at a high level. He's still separating. He's still looking really good in that regard. I don't think that his price has changed much since Ridley came in free agency, but I do see plenty of people on Twitter and in different platforms kind of suggesting that Ridley is going to be the wide receiver one. So I think that you can get a discount, based on that information, depending on your league, depending on your trade partner. And if that's something that you can do, I would absolutely jump on it. I also expect that the Titans are going to be playing from behind quite often. And that combined with Callahan coming in as the new head coach, I fully expect there to be plenty of passing volume to sustain multiple receivers if you're worried about the two of them in that offense that's prior to this point been very run heavy. And I would gladly take him over the likes of QJ, Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis, and maybe even Jerry Jeudy, kind of in that same range currently on Keep Trade Cut.
Absolutely, especially with the way that team's been retooled with Derrick Henry out of there. And then, like you said, looking like they're going with the more smaller, I guess, quicker approach to offenses. It seems like they have opened up the field for passing the ball a lot more, and DeAndre Hopkins could see a lot of success from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, moving over to the next buy that I have. This one's going to be a more expensive one, guys. So, this guy isn't exactly cheap. But we're looking at Saquon Barkley, who recently went to the Philadelphia Eagles in free agency. He is currently listed as the RB8 in Dynasty right now in terms of Keep Trade Cut. But reason,
real quick.
Yes.
Sorry. So when I looked last night, he was the RB8. I'm currently looking at it, and I know that you have the screen up, but it's weird with the updating. For me, it says he's the RB9 behind Travis Etienne.
I don't even know. I don't know how it's updating even because I had just refreshed it myself. I can refresh it again now.
But either way, I just wanted to make that distinction because that was really going to be my only point of contention with that, is that I would rather have Etienne. But if they're basically in that same range, then I don't know that I have anything to say against this.
Okay, okay, that's fair. But the reason why I do feel like he's a buy, like we talked about earlier, or we've talked about in other videos. Check out our other free agency videos. If you haven't seen those yet. But Saquon Barkley going to this team obviously is a huge upgrade for Saquon in terms of just situation, in terms of him having a better offensive line, in terms of him just having more high quality touches where he's not getting hit in the backfield immediately. So there should be a lot of room for Saquon to flourish a little bit more. I don't know if we'll see the same Saquon from his rookie year. I'm not saying that Saquon's still here, but he is still a great football player behind a great offensive line. And something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that, with the retirement of Jason Kelsey, this team, in terms of how they run the ball, in terms of how they run their offense, could change a little bit because I'm not sure how instrumental Kelsey was in terms of plays like the tush push, the things that, Jalen Hurts kind of vultures on the goal line where he takes a lot of red zone opportunities away. That play may not be as effective because he's not there. I'm not saying 100% it's not going to be, but that could be a factor because he is a Hall of Famer, Jason Kelsey. So it's kind of tough to replace that kind of a void. But with that being said, I'm saying there could be more opportunity opened up for Saquon in the red zone. And in terms of just how this offense is ran, with Kellen Moore there as the offensive coordinator, we're not exactly sure how this offense is going to look yet, but I'm absolutely sure it's going to be an upgrade over what we saw last year, and that's the reason why they made that change. So I'm very optimistic about Saquon. A lot of trades I've seen for Saquon involve like later first-round picks in terms of rookie picks. So I've seen like the 108 to 112 being traded for Saquon, maybe with a little bit extra on top. But I feel like in a year where the running back class is extremely, suspect and, in terms of teardrops from the first round, after like the 107, there is a pretty steep drop off in terms of the quality that you're going to get back for these picks. And if you could take that and turn it into a guy like Saquon Barkley, who is going to be good for at least, I feel like the next 2-3 years, possibly on a great team, I'm willing to make that trade for that first round pick.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. The only thing that might have held me back was if he was ranked above ETN, and even that, you're kind of splitting hairs. But staying true to kind of my own mantra in terms of how to value running backs in Dynasty, like more people should treat Dynasty running back rankings similarly to redraft running back rankings. And if we're looking at it from that lens, Saquon is going to be up there near the top of the list, regardless of what format you're in. And so, yeah, I'd be more than happy to try to acquire some Saquon shares, especially as a contender. Because as you mentioned, the upgrade from going from the Giants to the Eagles really can't be understated. We're talking about the third best run blocking line in the NFL last year, according to PFF, for the Eagles versus the 30th with the Giants. So he's gonna have such an easier time getting those yards before contact, which leads him into the open field, which is where he does his best work.
I absolutely agree with that. So if you guys are looking to get into Saquon Barkley and get some Saquon Barkley shares, I think this is a good time to do it right now. I think you're going to get a lot back for it.
Absolutely. Do you have a third buy?
I do. He's more of an honorable mention than like a guy I really want to sit and talk about a lot. But it was a trade,
Okay.
or not even a trade, a signing that I didn't even really notice happen until yesterday. I was doing a little bit of research. But Curtis Samuel to the Bills, I feel like is an interesting pickup for them. He's a guy who, as Commanders fans, we've seen him before, and we've seen him kind of sneakily perform pretty well. But in terms of just how he would fit in with this Bills team, they've kind of been looking for that guy to really solidify the slot role for them. And I feel like Curtis Samuel is a guy who could do that. And I feel like he's a guy who we've seen like guys succeed in this offense, like Cole Beasley, guys who are kind of behind. Even Isaiah McKenzie has seen some success, not as much as we would have liked to see. But I also feel like in terms of the player, I like Curtis Samuel a lot more than both of those two, especially at this point in their careers. And Curtis Samuel's currently listed right now as the wide receiver 60. He's around guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, Traylon Burks, and Alec Pierce. And quite frankly, I feel like he's producing at a higher level than all of those guys, at least right now. So I feel like right now he's more of a sneakier guy to keep an eye on. If you could trade something low for him, buy him for pennies, I would try to get him just to see what he can do out there, especially in a more high-powered offense like the Bills' offense, and with his tool set, with the versatility he can bring to an offense. So I just think he's more of an interesting guy out there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think he's underrated in terms of his talent, what he can bring to the football field. I do like Khalil Shakir, and I think that they have pretty similar skill sets.
Hmm.
But considering they brought him in free agency and they're willing to pay him the money, it does seem like he's probably going to have the fast track to winning that slot receiver job. Any worry about them kind of eating into each other's targets, or is it a thing where you feel like they can both thrive there?
It's something I'm a little worried about, but I still feel like they could both find some success. But that's also why I'm saying, like, try to buy him for pennies if you can, because I'm not trying to
Right.
break the bank on Curtis Samuel. I'm not expecting him to really be a super big guy out there. But with this offense and the
Yeah.
way things kind of ended with them last year, I'm not sure where they're going headed forward with the passing offense at least. So I think it's at least worth a shot.
No, I agree with you. I like that one.
And with that being said, we're going to move over to our sells. We're going to start talking sells. Who do you feel is a sell?
So I alluded to it in the beginning, and I hate to do it because I love him as a player. I wish him the best. I hope that he proves me wrong for putting him on this list. It's going to be Marquise Hollywood Brown, currently sitting as the keep trade cut wide receiver 34. Um, Really, truly don't think he's been given enough credit since he's been in the league for how complete of a receiver he is. He's more than just a deep threat. I think he's a good route runner and separator. Unfortunately, he's one of the few players in the league who I think actually deserves the injury prone tag that people like to throw around. I can pull up Draft Shark's injury profile for him. And you can see the extensive list of injuries that he's suffered since entering the NFL, whether it be ankle sprain, Lisfranc fracture, patella sprain, hamstring strain, another ankle strain, thigh glute strain, another foot fracture, a heel bruise. He can't seem to stay healthy since he's been in the NFL, and I just don't know that I can bet on him staying healthy with the Chiefs. I do think it's a good fit. I think that him with Patrick Mahomes could make some magic, but I think it's also worth considering one, he does have to compete with Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce for targets. I don't think that he's going to be the number one by any means amongst that group of guys. And his greatest strength as a field stretcher might not be quite as valuable as most people think. I'll pull up another tweet here that kind of references that. Last year, Chiefs opponents deployed two high safeties at a top 10 rate in the league, which led Patrick Mahomes to post a 6.7 ADOT, which was the third lowest amongst 33 qualified passers. So the league is responding to Patrick Mahomes' explosive downfield ability by taking that away and forcing him to check down underneath. And I feel like that plays more into the Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice type game than it does to Marquise Brown. So that's why I'm kind of staying away from him. And in terms of other guys that are ranked around him on KTC that I'd rather have, I think Christian Kirk is a good one. I think Christian Watson, even like similar type player in terms of explosiveness and injury history, but just younger version of him. I think I'd be willing to do. Diontae, who I mentioned, I'd do that as well. And any first or even early second, I think I'd be willing to take over Marquise Brown at this point too.
Absolutely. And like you said, with any player being going to the Chiefs and being in that offense, the hype around them is going to be so big that there's going to be someone in your team, in your league, willing to trade for him. Because a lot of people are like, "Oh man, this is like the next Tyreek Hill for the team," and it's not necessarily going to be that. Marquise Brown is not Tyreek Hill. He doesn't get as much done as Tyreek Hill does in just all areas of the field, because Tyreek can do everything everywhere. Marquise Brown, like you said, he really does. While he does win on a lot of routes, and like you said, I don't want to take too much away from him because he's not just a deep threat guy, but that is where he really, really does excel at, and if they're taking that away from Patrick Mahomes, it's not something that you really want to invest in. So I like that.
Absolutely.
With one of my sells, this is a guy who I'm looking at as a sell, but he's also looking at him as a hold as well. I'm talking about Baker Mayfield. Quarterback for the Buccaneers, just recently got re-signed for 3 years, $100 million. I'm looking at it as more of a 2-year contract, really, which is how, I guess most of these contracts should really be looked at. But in terms of his value right now, he is the quarterback. Oh, right here. He's the quarterback 24, at least for my rankings I've got in front of me. He's around guys like Will Levis and Michael Penix, Kirk Cousins. My bad, bro. But I feel like he's a guy who, if you have him on your team, you could be in an opportunity or in a position where you could tier up from a Baker Mayfield, not necessarily super high. You could probably trade Baker Mayfield, maybe a third-round pick for a guy like Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins even. I consider a tier up a little bit, even though Keep Trade Cut doesn't exactly agree with me here. But I feel like Baker Mayfield is a guy who could be moved. We've seen, these seasons out of Baker Mayfield where he's excelled really well and then found some struggles in years to come afterwards. So I'm not necessarily saying that's something that is going to happen, but it is in the realm of possibilities for him. The team is relatively the same as it was last year, so he should be walking into a similar situation as he did, possibly even a better one depending on how this draft goes and what they prioritize in the draft. But I do feel like the price right now on Baker Mayfield is probably as high as it's ever going to get. But with that being said, if you did have him on a team as a quarterback that you were starting, I'm not saying you necessarily have to sell him right now or you have to get rid of him. But what I'm saying is the window is open if you do want to sell a Baker Mayfield who is coming off one of his better seasons in the NFL. So me personally, if I had Baker on my roster right now, I would probably hold. But if I were offered an opportunity to tier up from him and I didn't have to give up a whole lot with him, I would take that opportunity.
I think the tier up is a great idea. If you're a contending team, you want to try to make that bump up. I think that makes a lot of sense. Tearing down, I don't know that I necessarily do, except for maybe a guy like Matt Stafford. He's somebody that I have at least a little bit of confidence in there. Also, Keep Trade Cut is so weird about how it updates because for me, it has Baker at QB 21, Kirk Cousins at QB 19. Things are all jumbled around.
Yeah.
But clearly, that shows you kind of how fluid the quarterback situation once you get past that top group. But I agree with you in the sense that Baker Mayfield can absolutely still be a fantasy contributor. It's not like a must sell. But I think you're in a good opportunity with that contract signing, kind of with that longevity, to be able to bump yourself up to a more sure asset like a Tua, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, something like that with a little bit on top. So I like that move a lot.
Absolutely. And who else do you have as a sell on this list?
We're going to go to one that you mentioned in a video not too long ago that I think got even more solidified now that free agency has played out. That's going to be DeAndre Swift, who is currently sitting, I believe, let me check, because again, the updating is crazy. I want to say he's the RB15.
Mine has RB11 on here. I don't know what's going on with Keep Trade Cut.
That's wild, but even better for my point.
Yeah.
Because he absolutely does not deserve to be all the way up there. Just kind of, when I looked last night, he was the RB15 ahead of guys like David Montgomery, Derrick Henry, Tyjae Spears. And so if we're going based on what we talked about with Saquon, which I think is correct, that you should be valuing dynasty running backs very similarly to the way that you do redraft running backs. I don't know why any of those guys would be ranked behind Swift. Tyjae, I could understand a little bit if you're worried about Pollard. I'm not as worried about Pollard, and also he's younger, so there's kind of the dynasty playing a factor into it. But with Demont, with Derrick Henry, I'd be more than happy to have those guys above. In terms of just his status with the rest of the team, I can pull up a tweet here to show you that I think Khalil Herbert is a better running back than DeAndre Swift, who's still under contract with the Bears. In terms of missed tackles forced per touch and yards from scrimmage per touch, which should, in theory, benefit DeAndre Swift because he's a better pass catcher. But as you can see on the graph here, Khalil Herbert really kind of leaves him in the dust in terms of overall efficiency as a runner. So I think, one, he's going to have trouble really solidifying himself in the early downs for this team. And then also, if we look at last year, that was the only healthy year of his career to this point, which I don't expect that trend to continue. And then in terms of his downgrade in offensive line, he went from the Eagles, who we just talked about with Saquon as the third best run blocking unit in the NFL, to the Bears, who ranked 23rd. So that efficiency that he struggles with in between the tackles is going to go down even further. Absolutely not buying him on a rebuilder. And if I'm a contender, like I already mentioned, give me Demont, Derrick Henry, some of these guys that also are going to get bumps, or at least Henry, who got bumps based on their free agency moves.
I absolutely agree. I feel like DeAndre Swift is kind of sitting in this weird kind of middle ground where we don't exactly know what this team is going to use him for. And with that being said, you should get rid of him because we're not sure what he's going to be doing over there. Obviously, Justin Fields is out of there now, so they're looking towards the quarterback of the future. And with that, offense being ran the way it could be run, they could lean on Khalil Herbert and primarily use DeAndre Swift as maybe even a receiving downs guy, possibly sort of relegate it back to what he was back in Detroit. But with that being said, DeAndre Swift's also never been the best runner between the tackles as well. So it's weird as to what his trajectory is going to be with this team. But with that being said, like you said, I agree. I think he's a sell.
I like it.
And moving to my next guy I've got on the list of sells, we don't have to go too far. I'm looking at Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans now as the RB16. He's a guy that, again, we talked about him a little bit more in our free agency video. So if you really want to see the in-depth look at him, check that video out. It's a longer video, so we had a little bit more time to talk. But with Joe Mixon, in terms of his usage in the NFL, he has been a really good fantasy asset when he was on the Bengals because volume was there and he was being used for just about everything, especially towards the end of his tenure there where he had the ball thrown to him a lot more than in prior years. So it's tough for me to know that exactly that is going to happen again when he gets to Houston. We've talked about, how he kind of thrives in more, gap and zone run schemes, whereas the Houston Texans don't really kind of run that kind of an offense, but maybe they'll tailor that towards him now that they have him there, but that's going to stand to be seen. Just in terms of him as a runner, like we talked about, he's not the most explosive anymore. He's kind of not lost a step, but in terms of explosiveness, I think he has kind of lost a step. He's just not as good as he used to be in terms of being able to make things happen for himself. And just because you're plugging him into this offense doesn't mean that it's going to be a bump up for him. I feel like in terms of offenses, the Bengals offense was on a similar caliber as the Houston Texans offense in terms of just usage, stuff like that. But I don't know if it fits a running back like Joe Mixon. You know what I mean? So I feel like if there's a time to sell Joe Mixon, it's probably now. Or, maybe he does well going into week 1, and maybe that's the time to sell him. But I think he's a guy, if you have him on your roster, you should be looking to move away from him because I don't know if that same volume is going to be there as it was in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think I agree with the premise. I do think he's going to get the volume. They've already extended him. I think that they've, by making that trade, by making that trade and also by moving Devin Singletary, I think that kind of proves that they are going to give him the ball. But to your point, I think that the scheme fit is very questionable. You already mentioned, and it's something we talked about in the last video. He's been much more efficient in those man and gap schemes than in zone schemes, which is what Bobby Slowick, I couldn't remember his first name. Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator for the Texans, loves to run. And that was kind of a big reason why Dameon Pierce got completely phased out of the offense last year when we weren't expecting it. It was the offensive coordinator change, the change in run style. And I don't know that it fits Mixon all that well. So I think that was a really good point to highlight. And I think you said that he's the RB16 on Keep Trade Cut for you?
Yeah, over here I have RB16. I'm not sure. What are you seeing on your side?
It's crazy how different it is. It's RB20. I think there's still a good argument to take advantage of the value spike because if you just look at his Keep Trade Cut value, you've seen that it has risen since that change has been made and he's been moved to the Texans. So I think it's a good time to take advantage. At RB16 prices, I'm absolutely doing that because then you do have guys like Derrick Henry, Tyjae Spears, kind of Ramondre Stevenson in that range below him that I would absolutely take over him. RB20, it gets a little bit more questionable, a little bit more in the hold territory, especially for contenders. But no, in general, I think that's a good move to make.
Bet. And who else do you have to round out our sells?
Yeah, the last guy that I have here, we're going to stick with the running backs once again. I don't think we have to go too far. Let me make sure that he's in the same spot. Nope, he's actually a little bit further down. So I got Zamir White. Currently, the Raiders' starting running back. When I checked last night, he was the RB22. He's already moved down to RB24. So some of the reasons why I feel like he's a sell at this point, he was very inefficient in college. I'll flash another chart up on your screen that kind of shows you what he looked like as a prospect coming out of Georgia compared to other successful running backs that have come into the league. And he's also been inefficient since he's been in the NFL. If you look at his player profiler, status, all of his running metrics have been kind of below average in terms of yards per touch, true yards per carry, juke rate, evaded tackles, yards created per touch, fantasy points per opportunity, all of that stuff. He's been really inefficient, and he's also been basically a non-factor in the receiving game. And so when you combine an inefficient runner with a lack of utilization in the passing game, those are typically really poor bets to make in terms of, guys that you want to have on your team at the running back position. And so regardless of whether or not the Raiders draft a running back come April, I think it's a good idea to sell him, but it might be an even better idea to sell him before the draft comes in case the Raiders do that, and then you see his value plummet and kind of drop off to where he's no longer a sought-after asset. So in terms of kind of where he's sitting right now on Keep Trade Cut, if you were to include the picks into the rankings, he's sitting right around a mid-second. That's a value that I would take for him right now. Even if you want to go one-for-one swap for another running back with that mid-second, I think that you can get some guys that are more talented than he is. And then if you also look, I want to say Kendre Miller, he's all the way down at RB34. He's a guy that I loved a lot more as a prospect, and I think does have opportunity coming his way this year and especially in the near future as soon as Alvin Kamara is off the team.
No, I absolutely agree. I feel like there's always a guy every year that like the starting running back disappears and they just expect the next guy to just get immediately that same volume and that same workload and just be that guy.
Yeah.
And, Zamir White is that guy, and he's not Josh Jacobs at the end of the day. He's not going to be able to do the same things. He's not as good of a runner. He's just not in as good of a situation as Josh Jacobs, just purely off of his own talent. And that's no knock to Zamir White. It's just the truth, and you can see it in the stats. So I think, like you said, the window is right now because you got to get rid of him before they bring in another running back, which is most likely what's going to happen, I feel like, in this situation.
No, absolutely.
So, with that being said, that is actually going to round out our list of buys and sells for NFL free agency, at least so far. We'll keep this updated as things go along if, things change, because certainly they will by the time, draft comes around, things like that. So, let us know down in the comments below. Did you like or dislike any of our sells? Do you have any of these guys and you're looking to move them? Let us know down below. And make sure you hit that like button and that subscribe button and that notification bell. That way you know when we drop all of our latest videos. We got a lot more on the way, especially with things starting to heat up a little bit more. And this has been an exciting free agency. I feel like this has been a lot more exciting than in years past. We've had a lot of shakeup this year. So it's honestly been great. But Eric, you got anything for the people before we get out of here?
Yeah, just real quick, if you guys could do us a huge favor and check out some of the links that we have down in the description below, especially if you want to have a deeper conversation with us, join the community that we've been starting to build over on Discord. We have the link down in the description below for that. You can talk to us about some of these buys and sells, about some of your redraft leagues, your dynasty leagues, some startups, any sort of trades that you're making, all sorts of good stuff. Come over there, talk to us, talk to our friends that we've been kind of growing this community over there. And then also check out the links to our partners, whether that be Do Numbers for some cool apparel, hoodies, t-shirts, hats, merch, stuff like this. This is not only Do Numbers, but it's a crossover with Choice Music Group if you're interested in some cool music as well. We have both of the links down in the description below for that. But yeah, if you've stuck with us all the way till the end, as always, we love you, and we'll catch you in the next video. Peace.
Peace.